Wars are not decided only on battlefields. Some are settled in silence, when myths collapse, when certainty erodes, when an enemy is revealed not as imagined, but as it truly is. In the final months of the war, as Europe smoldered and empires folded inward, a small convoy of defeated men crossed an ocean they had been taught to despise. They arrived not as conquerors, not even as enemies to be feared, but as witnesses. What they saw would haunt them more deeply than defeat itself. The ship's engines pulsed beneath the steel deck in a slow, deliberate cadence, one heavy thud for every mile carried west. Salt spray coated everything, the railings, the men's faces, the dull buttons of their ash-gray coats. The Atlantic wind cut through them with the scent of iron and rain. At the starboard rail stood General Carl Heinrich Vogler, 52 years old, an officer without troops, a commander stripped of command. Only weeks earlier, he had directed 15,000 men along the Rhine. Now he was one among 60 generals confined aboard a transport vessel, sailing toward the enemy's continent. Orders forbade conversation with the crew, but rumors flowed freely among the prisoners. "America is collapsing," one whispered. "Their cities burn," said another. "They'll need us as symbols." "It's theater," a third insisted. "They'll march us before their crowds." "They starve behind machines and slogans," someone muttered. Vogler remained silent. For years, such claims had poured from Reich radio broadcasts without pause. But in silence, doubt grows teeth. At dawn came the announcement, landfall. The prisoners were ordered on deck. Boots scraped metal. Guards barked commands. Diesel engines growled as the ship crept forward through thick gray fog. Then the mist parted. New York Harbor emerged, not broken, not wounded, but alive. Cranes moved like iron giants, lifting entire city blocks of cargo. Ferries carved white ribbons across the water. Barges heavy with coal slipped beneath skeletal bridges gleaming in early light. Beyond them rose towers of glass and stone, untouched, sharp-edged, radiant. The skyline looked impossibly intact. Salt stung Vogler's eyes as he stared. "It's a mirage," his adjutant whispered. No one replied. Even the guards fell quiet as if the sight subdued captor and captive alike. Then came the smell, oil and metal mixed with roasted coffee drifting from shore warehouses, a trace of warm bread beneath it all. Civilization had a scent. One Vogler had not breathed in years. Berlin came to him in memory, shattered streets, scorched plaster, air thick with despair. Here the wind carried abundance. The generals stood frozen at the rail, disbelief arranged like an exhibition. Hermann Dent, once a decorated staff officer, spoke softly. "They told us democracy was decadent," he said. "Perhaps it was only well-fed." Some scoffed on instinct, but their eyes betrayed them. As the ship passed Staten Island, the Statue of Liberty rose into view. Her green torch caught the sunlight like burnished gold. Uneasy laughter rippled across the deck. "So she still stands," someone murmured. An officer saluted, half mockery, half reverence. At the docks, no crowd waited. No cheers. No triumph. Cranes swung overhead. Stevedores shouted coordinates. Clerks stacked paperwork. The indifference unsettled the prisoners more than hatred ever could. This was victory practiced daily, not proclaimed. Cameras flashed as they descended the gangway. Reporters scribbled. Soldiers guided them onto trucks. No blows fell. No insults followed. An American colonel removed his cap, nodded, and said calmly, "Welcome to the United States, gentlemen." The translator repeated the words in German. "Welcome." For a moment, reality faltered. Vogler stepped onto the dock. The wood vibrated beneath his boots from passing freight. Inland, gasoline tanks gleamed. Trucks idled. Crates stacked high bore factory names he had never seen. Everything moved in coordination, as if obeying a rhythm no one announced. The dock smelled of sweat, steel, and optimism. This authority was informal, expressed through motion rather than salute. Vogler glanced back toward the harbor. The statue shrank behind them. With it, the war itself seemed to collapse into the ship's fading wake. Nothing matched the enemy he had been taught to imagine. Germany had called this nation improvised. Yet it looked engineered by confidence. If this is decadence, he thought, what does strength look like? The convoy rolled into a city untouched by ruin. Engines hummed with a new kind of thunder, the sound of a future already decided. The trucks rattled through streets flanked by skyscrapers like canyon walls. Windows glittered. Laundry hung from balconies. Antennas bristled. Civilian life flowed uninterrupted. No German city remained like this. Berlin lay silent beneath ash. Munich hollowed into shells. Here were storefronts bursting with goods. Tires, fruit, photographs, newspapers. A woman in a yellow dress crossed the street holding a child's hand. The generals turned as one, forgetting themselves. "They're pretending," someone whispered. "This is staged." But mile after mile denied it. Freight trains hauled cattle and timber. Workers waved casually. From the rail depot, the prisoners boarded Pullman-style cars, padded seats, open windows, even luggage racks. The comfort embarrassed them. Guards removed their caps, offered coffee in paper cups. For men expecting retribution, courtesy was more disturbing than cruelty. The train carried them south toward Fort Hunt. Steel and smoke gave way to fields, barns, white-steepled towns. Children paused on bicycles to wave as the locomotive thundered past. No insults followed. In Europe, 6 years of war had carved suspicion into every face. Here, people smiled with the certainty of tomorrow. When asked about bombing, the American officer hesitated, puzzled. "No Germans ever reached us," he said simply. "Your submarines came close. No damage. Untouchable." By afternoon, the tracks ran straight for miles. Vogler pressed his hand to the glass. "They built an empire with geometry," someone murmured. At Fort Hunt, captivity proved gentler than imagined. Low barracks beneath oak trees. Clean bedding. Yes. Water that ran clear. 3 uniforms per man. Hot meals. Orders given once, calmly, and obeyed. Disciplined by consent. The generals were brought here for information, leverage, distance from vengeance. But something else occurred. After years preaching superiority, they found themselves living inside a system more efficient than any they had designed, maintained by ordinary people. At night, they listened to freight trains, church bells, laughter from distant baseball fields. These were not the sounds of decay. They were the rhythm of confidence. Quiet questions began to circulate. How had this disorderly democracy defeated disciplined Europe? How had argument produced serenity? They were not being broken by force. They were being dismantled by example. Fort Hunt was meant as a laboratory for intelligence. For the men behind its fences, it became something else entirely, a glimpse of a world they had never understood. With daylight came the pattern of the place. Milk trucks arrived at the gates each morning from nearby dairies. Young American soldiers, shirts pressed, boots clean, unloaded bundles not of restraints but newspapers. At precisely 0700, breakfast was served. Oatmeal, fresh fruit, coffee. By 0730, lectures began. Some covered agriculture. Others engineering. Officially, they were meant to keep minds occupied. In practice, they did something else entirely. They replaced coercion with conversation. Where contempt had been expected, curiosity appeared instead. One morning, a U.S. logistics officer named Captain Hollis arrived. He could not have been more than 30. Sandy-haired, soft-spoken, with a habit of puncturing seriousness with dry humor. He asked General Vogler to explain how the Wehrmacht had sustained supply lines across the Eastern Front. They shared the same blackboard. Chalk moved inch by inch as maps took shape. Routes, depots, bottlenecks. Men who months earlier would have targeted each other with artillery now debated tonnage and rail timing like colleagues. When the session ended, Hollis handed Vogler a piece of chalk, dust clinging to both their hands. "Your roads were brilliant," he said plainly. "But you ran them like a clock wound too tight." Vogler stared at him. There was no slogan in the comment. No victory speech. Just analysis. What unsettled him was not the critique, but the assumption behind it. Hollis spoke as if they were equals. No rank asserted. No ideological distance enforced. In that moment, the hierarchy Vogler had lived by, authority earned through dominance, quietly collapsed. By autumn 1945, the generals were dispersed to camps farther inland: Algona, Iowa; Butner, North Carolina; Troutville, Virginia. Each relocation stripped away another illusion. Crossing the Mississippi by rail, they saw towns alive with consumption. Grocery signs glowed even in full daylight. Children dragged red wagons along sidewalks. Women in patterned dresses purchased fruit in quantities that seemed impossible. Every landscape looked rehearsed for abundance. They had been warned that democracy bred disorder, that liberty dulled effort. Yet the democracy before them wore work clothes. It planted fields, paved highways, opened factories at dawn, without secret police watching over it. At Camp Butner, their guards were mostly reservists and college graduates waiting to be discharged. One had studied philosophy at Ohio State. He loaned the prisoners a worn copy of Emerson and said almost casually, "Try self-reliance. It's like your Nietzsche, only it smiles more." They read late into the night beneath bare bulbs, discovering a form of authority that did not depend on fear. No one commands him, one general murmured. He commands himself. Revelations accumulated quietly. At Christmas, paper garlands were strung between dining hall beams. Dinner was turkey with cranberry dressing, nearly identical to what American soldiers ate. Gift parcels arrived from humanitarian groups. Inside were cigarettes, writing paper, and a small card bearing a single word, peace. It was not propaganda. It looked handmade, almost naive. Vogler rubbed the ink with his thumb, half expecting motive to smear beneath it. Nothing did. Then came the meeting that finished what doubt had begun. General Vogler was introduced to General Claiborne Rhee, a former officer from Patton's staff, visiting as liaison. Rhee entered without ceremony, saluted once and said, "We never met on the battlefield. Let's meet properly now." He took Vogler's hand without hesitation. The gesture pierced the last layer of emotional armor. Kindness, unguarded and unconcerned with rank, was the final insult to ideology. The guards noticed the change soon after. German officers who once carried themselves with theatrical stiffness relaxed. They began acknowledging centuries they had previously dismissed. They organized Sunday concerts using a donated piano. The music chosen was Beethoven, not marches, because it belonged to both sides. A local paper reported the event under a modest headline, "Former Enemies Present Recital." The tone was factual, almost friendly. Soon, shop owners wrote to the camp commander requesting prisoner labor for harvest season. In a democracy, even forgiveness arrived through contracts. Each day brought another quiet humiliation disguised as comfort. New boots were issued, American-made, perfectly fitted. Letters arrived from Germany describing hunger. Guilt spread among the generals. They ate meat twice a week while their homeland rationed grain. Their captors, who owed them nothing, fed them better than their own nation ever had. Perhaps, one general said softly, inequality is moral before it is material. Interrogations transformed into discussions of philosophy. Hollis asked whether they understood accountability the American way. "We answered only upward," Vogler replied carefully. "You answer outward to each other." Hollis nodded. "That's the difference between fear and law." Every exchange left a bruise that healed into admiration. Months passed like a curriculum of paradox. The longer they lived under American rules, the more humane those rules appeared. Meals arrived on time. Guards saluted politely. Discipline, when required, was transparent, even subject to appeal. At night, freight whistles echoed over snow-covered camps. Vogler watched the horizon and imagined railways stretching across an entire continent, order without obsession. "They do not worship the state," he wrote. "They believe the state belongs to them." The reversal was complete. In the nation once dismissed as inferior, they discovered efficiency born of trust. Every strand of barbed wire became a geometry lesson in democracy. Every sunrise in captivity emphasized freedom's calm. By summer 1946, repatriation lists circulated. With them came melancholy. Home meant ruins. America had become the nearest functioning idea of civilization. Vogler's final revelation came not from interrogation, but invitation. A small group of officers was allowed a supervised visit to a nearby town. Vogler joined reluctantly, expecting theater. The gates opened. They passed farms so orderly they looked deliberate, fences precise, tractors gleaming. Then came Algona, Iowa. Red brick storefronts. A movie theater advertising a Sinatra film. The smell of hay and gasoline. But it was the people that stunned them. Shoppers glanced up without hatred or fascination. A grocer waved. A child offered a stick of gum, generosity as reflex. To men raised on fear, indifference like this felt sacred. At a grain elevator, an industrial cathedral, conveyor belts thundered beneath vaulted beams, lifting corn skyward by the ton. An engineer explained the process cheerfully. "Feeds cattle, feeds people, feeds exports," he joked. "Keeps liberty fat." Vogler watched grain rise like civilization itself. "They dedicate architecture to food," he whispered. "And we," came the reply, "dedicated it to power." That night, Vogler asked for paper. He wrote a short letter addressed to no one. "I came to measure their weapons. I have measured their conscience instead. Here, factories sing louder than armies." He left it and signed. Departure was brief. Each man received a ration parcel, payment for labor, and a document certifying honorable conduct. At Norfolk, rain speckled their caps as cranes unloaded household goods. War had already dissolved back into production. When asked what he would remember most, Vogler answered, "The noise. The noise of creation, The return voyage mirrored the first. Through fog, the Statue of Liberty appeared once more, facing east. "She waits for us to learn," someone whispered. Years later, many of those officers would say their captivity in America marked the beginning of reconciliation with democracy. Some helped rebuild a new German army along principles first seen behind barbed wire, authority accountable to the governed. Others withdrew entirely, writing memoirs confessing that the Reich's true defeat occurred not on battlefields, but in the presence of decency unafraid of itself. For Vogler, it remained one sound, a factory whistle at dawn outside Camp Algona. Unlike sirens of terror, it signaled beginnings. Power that served creation rather than destruction. A quieter victory, yet the one that finally ended the war.